welcome. Welcome to our info session with Mike King. Um, we probably will be getting a few people more on the call, but we'll just get started. So just a couple of things. My name is Sandy Underwood. I'm competition manager at Horse Council BC. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, it's working, Sandy.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Thanks. So I won't keep everybody any longer, but if we'll just if you have any questions, just go ahead and throw them in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll for sure try and get to everyone's questions. Um, so with that, I will just hand things over to Mike, and Mike will get us started.
Thanks, Sandy, and I'll just remind everybody to stay on mute. You'll get feedback, and it'll be horrible, and nobody wants to listen to my voice in with feedback. It's hard enough. So, good evening, everybody. My name is Mike King, as Sandy indicated. I'm the national lead for the equine division at Acera Insurance. I'm very happy to be here, and I want to thank Sandy and everybody at Horse Council for the opportunity to speak to you all. Sandy and I were chatting just before the presentation began, and I mean, I was certainly aware that there were provincially sanctioned events in BC, as there are in many other provinces. However, I had no idea there were so many. I mean, Sandy was telling me that last year there was 180 events, which is just a staggering number to me, given the state of the sport these days. So for all of you on the call that are show organizers and on the call that are officials and others that volunteer their time or spend a great deal of time at horse shows, thank you, because frankly, that grassroots support is what this industry needs more than anything else that I can imagine. So, um, without too much of a background, so I've been doing this sort of insurance brokerage thing since 1993. So I'm long in the tooth, like some old horses in the barn. I was a competitor many bazillion years ago, so I do have some personal familiarity with horse show environments, and I'm certainly happy to try and bring some points to the fore, some of which you'll know intuitively, some of which might be new, or some might just be reminders. But either way, it's a win-win. This presentation is being recorded, so that if you want to refer back to it or what have you certainly can, as will the PowerPoint presentation. It'll be posted somewhere on Horse Council's website, so maybe there's a point or two on there that you can come back to. And I'm always available for questions. And I want to stress that this is really just for informational purposes. This is a very neutral risk management discussion. When we get started, I'm going to go through a series of slides that speak to things that will be familiar to all of you, but specifically about the risk exposures that organizers have, and separately, but in sort of an attached way, the risk exposures that officials have at horse shows, which are very specific to them, even though they're correlated with the show itself. So next slide, please. And here we go. So, and I will tell you all, I'm really not that great with technology. So Bree, who's the communication person at Horse Council, is my Vanna White tonight, and she used that term, not me. So just so you know. So listen, here's where we begin, and I think we would all agree, if we sort of stop and think about it, that horse shows are indeed high risk environments. Horses just being sort of just the unpredictable animal that they can be if they choose to be. There's a congregation of people and horse trailers and trucks and spectators and folks running around and folks that are very excited to be there and all kinds of hype. And so by virtue of that, it does become a very dynamic condition, which does represent increased risk. And with that in mind, there's things that we need to do as organizers and as officials to try and mitigate some of those dynamics to make sure that everyone remains safe on the days of the event. So some of the core risk management areas obviously are the things that we're trying to do by virtue of doing a responsible job running the event, and that's to protect participant safety. We're obviously always concerned with animal welfare. organizational sustainability, and personal liability for those that are involved. Liability does arise mainly from negligence, such as ignoring hazards or failing to enforce rules, not inherent horse risks. And that's an important point. I think we all know as horse folk or people involved in the industry, as we sort of said a moment ago, that horses can be quite unpredictable. But in my experience, frankly, horse shows are, frankly, you've got a groom, you've got family helping with horses, you've got people around that hopefully know what they're doing. So it's not necessarily statistically the horse exposure itself, it's more the environment in which we're in. So risk management, just being proactive, starts with planning, continues through the event days, and includes post-event reporting and consistent policies. Sanctioning is critical. And I want to pause there just for a moment. I mean, we're speaking to an audience that has already sort of drank the Kool-Aid, as it were, and you've embraced a set of rules that Horse Council has worked very hard on over the years. And that becomes a critical point of reference for us as insurers and for the legal system. Because now there's a toolbook, there's a toolbox, there's a point of reference, there's a right and a wrong. It's not typically a gray sort of decision that might be made when a rule is enforced. And that's actually critically important. So again, I applaud all of you for embracing the sanctioning element and not running events that are not under that sort of umbrella. Next slide, please. So why does risk management matter? Consequences of poor risk management are very, very clear for me. They certainly can lead to lawsuits, reputational damage, financial strain, loss of event privileges. All of those things are very real risks. Being proactive with risk management plan helps to mitigate those exposures. I assure you, no one wants to be involved in a lawsuit. Having been as a broker for this many years, I've had the privilege of reading through claims in our industry and watching clients in some cases or industry participants sort of maneuver through claims when they do arise and maneuvering through the legal system. And I'm fully aware of the strain that it puts on folks when they're named in a legal action. So avoiding that is a very good strategy at all costs if you can. There is a shared responsibility as listed here. The organizers, the officials, and the participants all play vital roles. And it's that coordinated effort and sort of being aware of all of the people that share the responsibility is obviously a very important element. Controlling congestion, ensuring safe footing, separating public from horse traffic seems very obvious. Depends so much on the venue. We've all been to horse shows and perhaps run horse shows where there are constraints on what's available in terms of facility, and that can lead to problems if they're not sort of managed proactively in advance. The last thing is this importance of animal welfare, and I'm not the first person to be saying this out loud, but the equine industry struggles sometimes with social license. There are lots of folks that don't believe that we should be riding horses or competing on horses or using tack and equipment that some would find offensive or restrictive or cruel in some senses. So social license is a very big topic these days, and one that the entire industry needs to be aware of. The public is watching, and the use of video and social media platforms and YouTube and the internet and all those things can be very damaging, often taken out of context. So social license and being protective appropriately for animal welfare is a critical element here, especially if we want to continue growing the industry. Any of us that have been in the business long enough know that the industry struggles sometimes. It's not just economic pressures that can hinder the horse industry. It's all manner of things, and that does include public's perception of what we do as horsemen and women to compete and enjoy our animals. So it's becoming an increasingly important risk exposure and one that demands as much consideration as possible. Next slide, please. So who's responsible? And I don't know what that, can everybody else see those green lines on my slides? I don't know where the heck that came from, and I'm sorry for that. It's not on my end, so I don't know what's happening. So I apologize. That looks rather messy. So who's legally exposed at a horse show? Multiple parties, and we talked about this a second ago. The uh, people responsible for the horse shows, the committees that organize the events, the sanctioning body, which in this case would be Horse Council, individuals involved, volunteers, all manner of folks. Thank you. All manner of folks that are involved in the event are exposed. There is no question that when an incident does arise, if a claim sort of comes forward, it's rarely a single defendant in an environment such as this. It's often multiple defendants that are named in the action by the claimant. And so the exposure, you can't sort of hide behind, well, it wasn't me, not in that particular circumstance. It doesn't mean that a claimant lawyer can't name you in the action, which would require, therefore, for you to defend yourself by some means and appear in court if necessary to explain your relationship with the incident. So there's a significant exposure for a whole bunch of different folks. There's the roles that are at risk, the officials, the volunteers, the landowners, facility operators, all can be involved in this. All can face legal claims for safety failures. The importance of training, I can't stress this enough. Clear role definitions. We're going to talk a little bit about volunteers in a moment, but the volunteers are the backbone of our industry, and we all know that, as it is with most sports. It's so important to not just have a warm body on the ground, but somebody that has some knowledge of what to expect, what their responsibilities are, and for them to stay in their lane, which is sometimes a problem. But having that proper training prior to the event, not on the day of, communication, leadership, all of those things are critically important to reduce legal exposure and ensure the safety of everyone involved, including the volunteers. Following the PTSO sanctioned competition rules and documenting procedures demonstrates reasonable care and helps defend against claims. I speak about this sort of thing often when I'm doing these seminars, but when we've got written documentation that proves or shows that the defendant has been proactive by documenting things, by training folks involved at the horse show, frankly, that defense becomes very strong. Keeping in mind that in the court of law, even though they say it's your sort of a jury of your peers, it's unlikely that anybody on the jury has ever run a horse show. So they're not going to know too much. They're going to become educated about the environment and about whatever that claim is involved, or whatever is involved in the claim at the time of the trial. And so having that documented sort of history is a critically important element. Next slide, please. So what are some of the core risk categories in the horse show operations? Here they are. The participant risk. These are obvious ones. Risk to riders, handlers, grooms, including falls, collisions, and horse-related injuries during the events. Can't forget our spectators. We want as many folks out there as we possibly can, but a lot of those spectators are not horse savvy. They don't understand that you can't stop a galloping horse by sticking out your hand and grabbing the reins, which I've seen so often, and it's just tragic every time. Or not understanding that the horse on TV is not the same horse that's now running amok around the horse show grounds. So all of those things can be problematic. Facility and property risks. These happen, again, sometimes, not always, and we know that folks don't do these things intentionally necessarily. But the footing quality, the fencing, the lighting, the temporary structures that we bring in to accommodate either competitors or the spectators, stabling, fire hazards, all those things. The volunteer and worker risk, I made a point of writing this in just because fatigue is a real thing and inexperience is a real thing. And as I said a moment ago, having warm bodies on the ground is great, but it's not great if they've been up for 16 hours without being fed or watered themselves, haven't had a chance to take a break. And that's when mistakes can happen. And it's very important, obviously, then to look after our workers and our volunteers to make sure that they're healthy so that they can react to environments or to circumstances if they do arise. The governance risks goes without saying. Compliance with the rules. Again, I've mentioned it a couple of times, and we'll probably say it repeatedly throughout this, that following the rules is so important. Being familiar with the rules is not just the judges or the officials' responsibility, in my opinion. Competitors obviously need to know what the rules are, but the folks that are organizing the event need to have some familiarity about what the expectations are in the ring and outside of the ring, so that they can assist in developing an environment that works with the rules. And again, record keeping being critical for risk control. Next slide, please. So a little bit of a deeper dive. The common horse related incidents: falls, kicks, bites, trampling. Horse collisions are frequent. Risks in the warm-up rings. We've all been at events where the warm-up rings become chaotic. Not intentionally necessarily, but folks are rushing around. People are competitive. They're trying to do their work in the warm-up ring. I've always been of the opinion that if you have to do that much schooling in the warm-up ring, you probably shouldn't be at the event, but that's just me. It's intended to be a warm-up, not a training environment. But that's not always how folks deal with that environment. And there's nothing worse than trying to do something very specific to prepare the horse for the competition moment than being in a crowded environment or in an environment where you've got inexperienced folks or officials that are not necessarily paying attention. And this is obviously one of the areas where the role of the officials and the controls that they bring to it are so important. But risk factors in competitions. Risk rises obviously with inexperienced riders, handle reactive horses, how they react. And when divisions with mixed skill levels compete against each other, so you've got a dead beginner in the warm-up ring, and you've got a very experienced rider in the warm-up ring, that can often lead to all kinds of problems. Sandy made sure that I pointed out and acknowledged that you folks that are officials, that you are a qualified provincial rules officer or a pro. And again, it's critically important that the warm-up areas, as well as in the ring, in enforcing equipment rules, removing unsafe horses promptly and sort of with authority to ensure the safety of all concerned. When intervention is necessary, it's so important that it's early. We don't want anyone to let the circumstances accelerate or amplify. That can only lead to a bigger catastrophe. It's better to shut it down as quickly as possible or as practical to make sure that the problem doesn't get out of control. Next slide, please. So our spectators. This is the one that I think is sometimes overlooked. And again, we talked about it a little bit already, but it's sometimes overlooked because there's so much focus, obviously, on the horse and being in the ring and the things just outside the ring, the warm-up areas, the chute, all those things that are elements of the horse competition itself. But again, we're trying to encourage the general public to come to the event. We're trying to get the general public to embrace equestrian activity, to grow the sport, to grow the competitions. So we better look after them. And that means making sure that they have adequate, safe environments to watch the event, to participate as necessary. But that means having secure barriers. I get very twisted when I go to events and I see things like, it's not even chicken wire, but just sort of those construction fences as being a quasi separator. I don't have any real issue with those construction fences as sort of a chute for folks to get to where they're supposed to watch the event, so they're not wandering amok. But I do have a problem with them being used as some sort of an attempt to keep a horse contained or some other thing, because that's just not going to work. I get very concerned about golf carts at horse shows. It's become a very common element of events. And not all venues are built very well to accommodate that. I guess what this really comes down to is there needs to be clear separation for the general public and the horses, as much as is possible or as practical. And the final element that I wanted to bring up is the parking lot. When we talk to horse show organizers and we talk about the mock sort of, the perfect sort of showground, as it were, the parking areas, obviously for horse trailers and trucks and what have we, are far away from the competition ring. And there's a volunteer, who is assigned a full day responsibility for monitoring what's going on in the parking lot. It's not just about folks invariably trying to park their rig in the perfect spot in that parking area and making it difficult for other trailers to get in and out. Then there's always the parking areas that are sometimes on the worst ground. So we got trucks and trailers that might get stuck at the end of the day. So I hope that the horse show organizers, if they think that is a possibility, that they've got a tractor or some other means and a big old 4x4 or something to help folks get loose if they do get stuck. And again, somebody a volunteer in that parking area just to make sure that people can get in and out. That if a horse does get away in the parking area, which does happen as people are getting tacked up and stuff, that there's some provision for safety that someone can be alerted. That the showground officers or volunteers can be alerted to say there's a horse loose, so that folks can be proactive in trying to mitigate that exposure. Um, Again, I don't want to dwell on parking lots, but it really is a bugaboo for me. It's horrible when you can't get in and out with a horse trailer. It's hard enough to be hauling horses, often over, you park in that field in the back sort of thing, and without there being clear markings on how to get in and out. Anyway, next slide, please. Too much of that. So again, some of this is repetitive, and I apologize for that. But uneven footing is obviously a big problem. Poor lighting if the event's going to run into the dusk hours. Exposed electrical cords. Again, it sounds so obvious, but we've got microphones and speakers and all sorts of sound systems that sometimes require electrical cords. Has there been adequate protection given to those things so that a horse can't stand on it inadvertently or someone can't trip on it inadvertently? Unsecured equipment increases the injury risk. I mean, again, these are common sense elements, but perhaps it'll spark somebody to sort of take some note of that the next time they run an event, so that they will make special consideration to mitigate that. Fire risk is a very real hazard. I can't recall a fire at a horse show. I'm sure it's happened, but again, it's something that we have to be cognizant of if we're providing bedding or if we're providing stabling for animals at competitions. If it's an overnight event, brings in a whole other element in terms of how that structure necessarily is safe, and emergency planning. Who's responsible to call 911? Is there signage? Are there fire extinguishers? Are there any sort of all those sorts of things that we might have at home on the farm? If we're inviting people to stay at the facility, are they allowed to camp? Where is it in proximity to the barn? Is there running water? All those sorts of very obvious things, I would hope. Pre-event inspections are so important. Maintenance checks, making sure that things are exactly as planned, and hazard reporting in line with standards and support insurance claims. Again, we're talking about setting up a situation where if a claim does arise, that it can be documented that every reasonable thing was done to avoid the loss in the first place. That helps to reduce the quote unquote negligence that might be aimed at you as the show organizer. And a lot of this stuff is preventable. You can't prevent 100% of this. You can't stop people from being who they are, but you can certainly mitigate it to protect yourself and others around you at the event. Next slide, please. Here are just a couple of sort of claim scenarios. These are not from files. These are just sort of claim examples that I think we can all recognize. Sharing a warm-up ring, an inexperienced rider loses control of their horse, resulting in a collision. All hell breaks loose, and a rider is seriously injured. So who's going to be responsible for that is obviously a question that would arise, and it might be a whole range of folks. But if there's not supervision in the warm-up area, that becomes a very real safety hazard. Officials are expected to intervene when risks become foreseeable. So if some official is viewing the warm-up area and sees a horse that is being quite uncooperative on that day, or is being ridden by a rider who is not able to control the animal safely, there's no question it's the official's responsibility to stop whatever's going on and to have words if necessary, or to remove that hazard from the environment. No red ribbon is worth someone being injured, as I think we would all agree. So, claim scenario 2, a spectator unfamiliar with horses stands too close in the competition ring and a horse gets loose and they get injured. Wow, that's something that can happen. Horses do throw their riders from time to time, as we all know, whether it's in the chute before they go in the ring or in the ring itself, although I would argue that Really, on the show grounds, the show ring itself is probably the safest place. But nonetheless, when horses do decide to remove the rider from their back and get loose, they often do act quite unpredictably, and they might want to get the hell away from wherever they are. And again, an unsuspecting spectator who sees the horse running at them may not know what to do or what not to do, and an injury can occur. So spectators are owed a higher duty of care, and that's important because they are unsuspecting in the court's eyes. They are innocent bystanders, quite literally. They are not expected to know or understand or predict animal behavior. They are not expected to know or expect what the environment is at a horse show. They just know that they are at a horse show. So it can become a very legally tangled mess if a spectator is injured. So special attention needs to be made to them. Claim 3 is one that every horse show organizer fears or has experienced, perhaps. Torrential downfall at midday. What do you do? Has the footing been compromised? Has the ring been compromised? What do you do? This is an official's call, and I know that there's all kinds of training that goes into that, as there should be. But there's also a common sense element, notwithstanding the pressures of continuing with the event, that has to be superseded by the responsibility that they have to ensure the safety of horses and riders. If the show proceeds and something a horse slips in the ring, I mean, it's pretty easy to point the finger. Why did you let the show go on? Or the pending thunderstorm. And again, this is one that happens a lot here in Southern Ontario. I can't speak to what happens in BC so much, but I can certainly attest to the fact that weather can change. I think we all agree that weather can change instantly, and officials need to be able to react to whatever that environment is, and have a plan about holding up the show or canceling it altogether if the weather conditions or the environment changes so dramatically that the safety of all involved can't be ensured. Next slide, please. Our dear volunteers. What can we do without them? We can't. We can't run horse shows without them. It would be impossible. These are unpaid positions, and people just do it for the love of the sport. They do it for love of community, and thank goodness for all of them. But untrained volunteers do face risks, not knowing what their job is. I mentioned before, fatigue, having tasks given them that are beyond their experience. These things clearly increase the event hazards. Putting the 12-year-old or putting a 12-year-old in charge of the in gate would be an error. I think we would all agree. But it does happen. People can only gain experience by doing. I get that, but certainly it's not impossible to imagine mentoring or having training sessions to try and mitigate some of that inexperience and trying to embrace people that are capable of being in the job that is necessary. And I think we could all write a list, and I didn't do this on a slide, but it wouldn't be impossible to come up with a list. You probably do it intuitively, or perhaps you do it mechanically and formally, but what all those volunteer roles are. I picked this slide very specifically because their colored t-shirts are all the same. I love that when I go to an event where volunteers are easily identified, whether it be with a t-shirt or with a hat or some other thing, an armband, something that says that if I'm a spectator, I can pick those folks out and know that they're involved with the event, and they can direct me to whatever service or thing that I'm trying to find out. There's nothing worse than running around an event not knowing who to talk to, and volunteers, frankly, I would say, will do take pride in being identified as being part of the event, and so having T-shirts or other identification is a really important element in my view. Clear role definitions ensure volunteers act within coverage scope of their activity, scope of their responsibility. But they also need to be advised that they are at risk. I think that that's a responsible discussion to have prior to the event, that you're delighted that they're there, but they are in fact taking on some risk, and they should do so with their eyes wide open. But they also need to be encouraged to report concerns and avoid high-risk tasks to promote event safety culture. Again, in my experience many years ago when I was involved in horse shows, the volunteers kept coming back. I mean, these folks knew their job. And you'd see the same folks at the same events. And these were just folks that really enjoyed being around horses and around the people that were involved with the horses. And it does promote a safety culture. The leaders take responsibility for what goes on with all the other volunteers, and it can become very important and very strong. So next slide, please. Finally, we get to the officials. So very specific stuff about them, because there are unique risks, because their decisions directly affect safety and fairness in the competition. The role cannot be minimized. It is a critical job, the job at a horse show. And for those on the call that are officials, I thank you for your service and your dedication. Without you, competitions can't go forward. They can't exist. And taking that responsibility seriously is obviously so important, not only for the safety of the environment, but just so that there's consistency and predictability for competitors. There's nothing worse than having a rule interpreted, which invariably will lead to someone alleging prejudice or someone alleging that the official is being favorable to one competitor over another. The rules are written in such a way that ideally they're sort of black or white. They are not gray. And if a rule is broken, it's broken. Circumstances aside, mitigating circumstances aside, rules need to be followed all the time, not some of the time. Officials can be named personally in claims for failing to enforce the rules or intervene in unsafe conditions. Again, they are the top dog. They are the folks in charge. They are the folks that people turn to for ruling, for questions that need to be answered. It's a very big job, and it requires an awful lot of attention and work. I know Horse Council does an awful lot of work training officials before they're carded, and that training is ongoing. It doesn't just come from sort of the formal stuff, but it comes from experience. It comes from talking with your peers, and there are a whole bunch of you in BC. Goodness knows, Sandy was telling me the numbers, and it's really quite a large community. So it's something that anyway, critically important. But you do have very unique risks as that person in charge. You're supported within the framework of being carded. That framework includes your training. Again, we're talking about, from my perspective, what happens if a claim does arise and the official is named. Can we demonstrate through counsel rather, in a court of law at the end of a very long process, that the official was within their authority to impose the rule, and they did so appropriately. They documented the outcome. They documented the circumstances arising that led them to the enforcement of the rule. All of those things in a very responsible and consistent manner. That they ideally have sufficient experience from other events that we can go back in time to review how things have been done historically. All of those things become very important elements in any defense. So again, officials and their scribes, if they need them, are critical elements and critical folks at these events. Next slide, please. So I've already just said this really. So again, I have a tendency to do this, got ahead of myself a little bit, but accurate documentation like incident reports and waivers, support incident response, and legal claims. I mean, these are exactly the reasons why having documents, making sure that everyone has signed an acknowledgement of risk form, or a waiver as it's called, that incident reports are in fact completed quickly and filed. It's something that does happen. We'll often get incident reports days, if not weeks, after an event. Not acceptable. We need to know, as insurers, all of us, to be able to react to those circumstances. What may not seem serious on the day of the event can become very serious a couple of days later, when the person sort of decides to go to the hospital or decides to go to the doctor, and all of a sudden now there's a medical issue, and you can be blindsided by those things. And just to be clear, when incident reports are filed, most insuring companies will evaluate it and decide whether or not to reach out proactively to the injured person, They'll certainly speak to the person who is responsible for drafting the incident report to make sure the details are factual and complete. But again, it's really, especially if you're relying on insurance to potentially defend you in an incident, it's so important to engage the insurer through the broker as quickly as possible. Waiting for something bad to happen months and months after the fact doesn't help anybody. It surely does not help the insurer because things have a tendency to fester and they get worse over time. So insurers will make a determination, and it's their decision to make. It's their money, after all, that might be defending you or paying out a claim on your behalf. So it's their decision alone to either react or simply file away and check back in at a later date. But it's really important to advise insurers that are insuring the event of incidents that do occur. As far as a threshold, I would say to you that if any bodily injury occurs that requires medical attention, ambulance was called, someone got hauled off in an ambulance, someone didn't get back into the competition ring because of potential concussion, those things are reportable, in my view. And again, the broker doesn't make the determination about whether or not the insurer should respond. It's the broker's responsibility to report the incident as provided, and the insuring company themselves will make a determination. We simply help to facilitate the pathway, as it were, for the information to move upstream and downstream. And then our job as brokers is to advocate for you as the defendant, as our client, whether you be an official, whether you be the show organizer, to make sure that the insuring company is doing their job and providing a response to you. The PTSO insurance that is provided by Acera Insurance to the BC Horse Council and the other provincial equine associations across Canada, with the exception of Quebec, it covers liability. I mean, that's what this is about. So it covers injured participants. It covers volunteers. It covers officers and others on the committee that are organizing the event. That's the job. And the policies that we provide. And we're not alone. I mean, we recognize that we don't insure every event. We insure an awful lot of them, but we don't insure every event. But the brokers and insurers who are participants in this sport or this space provide similar coverage. There's no arguing that. So, outcome of a claim could be affected by compliance with the PTSO rules. I mentioned this earlier. That rule book becomes the point of reference. There is no other point of reference that the insuring company can refer to. It becomes a critical part of the defense. So complying with those rules and having proper risk management measures are the things that will determine whether coverage is not necessarily denied, but whether or not coverage is going to be able to be fully provided, and whether or not there's a reasonable defense that can be launched on your behalf. My point is, if your insurers are your partners in risk management, we are only one tool in the risk management toolbox. But if you're going to rely upon the insuring industry to protect you, you have a responsibility to work with them in ways that make sense, so that if a defense is required on your behalf, that is being paid for by the insurer, that they've got all the tools and bits and pieces that they need to do their job. It helps you and it helps them. I mean, make no mistake, it's self-serving. Understanding insurance limits helps the organizers understand and make informed decisions. I don't really want to talk about limits of insurance. I'll take a question if you'd like at some point later on, but $2 million is a lot of money in my world, certainly, but is it a lot of money in a court of law? Not as much as it once was. Inflation has found its way into the courts as well. We like higher limits, frankly. We like limits not being reached or exceeded, and the cost, frankly, for increasing limits to 5 million from 2 million are rarely 2.5 times the $2 million premium. It's not a straight math sort of equation. It's about predictability of exposure, really, from the insuring company's perspective, based on historical evidence. How many claims has there been at horse shows, and what have the settlements been, and those sorts of things that the actuaries all research, and that's how they spend their life at the insuring companies. and then they assess a premium based on the predictability of that. So I like higher limits personally as a broker, and I would hope that the folks don't sort of shortchange themselves. Nothing would be more catastrophic than having a claim for $3 million when you've only got $2 million of coverage. That would be a disaster. Anyway, next slide, please. All right, so back to the officials. Again, I'm sure this is all in your training, guys, and this is really just a reminder of the things that you need to be doing, proactively inspecting the rings, to identify potential hazards before the event starts, doing the walkabouts that you invariably do, confirming emergency response plans. Who's responsible for calling 911? It's not the official's job to be doing that. Invariably, it's somebody on the show committee or potentially a volunteer of experience who's the person that would be contacted in the event of there being an emergency response required and doing what needs to be done. You know, have if there's not an ambulance on site, has somebody informed the local fire department or the ambulance service that there's an event going on? That's a very proactive thing to do. It doesn't cost any money to tell them that, hey, there's going to be a congregation of horses, trailers and trucks and people and horses at this event on that day, so that the emergency response community is somewhat aware of what's going to happen, so that if something does go on, they know where to go, and they know how to sort of manage the circumstances when they arise. Continuous monitoring of horse riders' suitability. Again, such a long day for officials, and I do understand this and respect it so much. Having eyes in the back of your head is just part of the job, and it's really hard. It's not an easy thing to do. But relying on volunteers and others on the show committee to assist in just sort of keeping an eye on things, even though the decisions will be made by the officials alone, is obviously a strategy that can work. You can't be in 5 places at once. You can only concentrate on so many things at once, and fatigue does count. So officials also need breaks. They're human beings after all. They need health breaks and water breaks and food breaks and rest and all those other things to get through what are very, very long days. And so it's just that's all to be said about that. Documentation, communication, again, just what we've spoken about. Having appropriate documentation is so important. Communicating with the show organizing committee on an ongoing basis throughout the day, throughout the event, so that if there is if there is an issue, there's a point of reference. Next slide, please. So I wanted to be clear about what sort of the PTSO, Horse Council BC's policy does and what it doesn't do. As I said in an earlier slide, the Horse Council program that Acera Insurance provides to members is a liability policy that's primarily driven by the exposure surrounding ownership, leasing, or control of a horse. It's not about running a horse show. It's not about being an official. It's not about any of those things. It's about direct sort of relationship with a horse. There's no commercial exposure covered by that policy. There's no business element attached to that member liability coverage. It's part of a group plan. The only criteria that is necessary to sort of be involved in that is to be a member in good standing of Horse Council of BC. But again, I want to stress it does not cover officiating. It does not cover running a horse show. Those things are covered by a separate policy, commercial general liability policy. It obviously does cover all of the activities that are commercial in nature or can be perceived as being commercial. I want to stress that. On a commercial general liability policy, the declaration page, the first page of the document or certificate of insurance might be provided, describes those activities and the operations that are insured. It's quite specific. There might be exclusions about certain things within the policy wording. It's very important, obviously, then to understand the limitations on the commercial general liability policy. Each of those policies is individually underwritten as compared to a group plan, which is not underwritten in the same way above. And that assessment of the risk and the limits of coverage will determine the premium. And each of those policies might have individual endorsements or additions made to the policy wording. And that might include things like additional insurance. And we talk about this often with show organizers. It's not uncommon for a horse show policy to have a number of additional insureds. So to be clear on what that means, Mike King decides to run a horse show in Merritt, BC. And so Mike King Horse Show Committee is the named insured, but I lease the land from Joe Smith. So my policy would have an additional insured endorsement that would detail the fact that Joe Smith is also covered for my operations on his land. That policy might also have additional insureds to include officials that I engage for the purposes of running the event. It might also say that volunteers are covered who are helping me run the event. And there might be other folks that I've made a determination need to be covered by my policy, that commercial general liability policy that's specific to my event. But that's just an example of the various endorsements or additions and exclusions that can be made in a commercial general liability policy because it's very specific to that client, that operation, and potentially that event. So very different. But again, I want to stress that the Horse Council coverage that Acera Insurance provides does not address those things in the sort of the membership alone. They require separate documentation. Next policy, please. Or next policy. Next slide, please. So here are the key takeaways. We are done in just a moment, folks, and we'll get to questions. Deliberate planning and responsibility. Can't stress this enough. Careful planning, informed decisions, shared responsibility among everybody involved, including the officials. Risk management and prevention, supervision, rule enforcement, early intervention. They help prevent injuries. They They help to prevent many incidents inherent in equestrian sport. We can't avoid the fact that we are dealing with a 1,000-pound animal. I don't know how else to sort of say that, and that's how it's going to be described in a court. I can't tell you. It's just I've sat through court proceedings many times, and it's astounding to me how dangerous these animals can be described by the claimant's lawyer. They are not the big brown-eyed mush bucket that we might know in our barn. In court, they are 1,000-pound wild creatures that we have attempted to tame, but and should have been able to predict the unpredictability. That's how it's described. Whether it's right or wrong, whether it's fair or not, is not the question, but that's how it's described. And so it's anyway. This is one of those things. Protecting welfare and sustainability. Again, I spoke to the fact that social license is a big issue in our sport these days, becoming bigger all the time, it seems. But effective risk management ensures the animal's welfare, participant confidence, and long-term competition sustainability. What I want to do is I want to be coming back here next year to find out that now there's 250 events in BC, that the horse shows are being run so consistently, the volunteers are stepping up to participate or to assist in the organization and operation of events, that officials are continuing to be educated, that you're encouraging others to get into the sport and get into these very responsible positions so that the industry can flourish. I count on it. It's my livelihood, and it's my passion as well, and I share it with you. Anyway, that's it. Next slide. Should say thank you. So I'll stop talking, surprisingly. I went a little longer than usual, and I apologize for that, but I'll happily take questions if there are any. But I'll let Bree or Sandy sort of step in here and help me address whatever those questions might be.
Thanks, Mike. Lots to think about, lots of really important information. Whether you're a competition management or an official. Does anyone have any questions for Mike? Don't be shy.
Yeah, I do.
Sure. Glenn, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. And thank you, Mike. Very informative. I had a question. I can't remember if it was slide 4. I was just trying to write down some of the notes. As an official, as you indicated, we're also asked to supervise the warm-up arena. As far as, any equipment, wrong equipment, obviously, harm to the animals or incidents that could be happening in there. And sometimes this is literally impossible if we're in the arena, in class form, class in hand. Would you recommend when talking to the organizers of the show that they have somebody assigned and then to report to the official if there is something that needs to be addressed? A little
From
concerned about
Yeah, from my perspective, the answer would be yes. But I'm going to drag Sandy into this as well. I mean,
that. Okay.
because I think
Yeah.
when
Um,
you can't have eyes everywhere, and I
Can't be
mentioned that in
everywhere.
the
You're right.
presentation. You're human after all, and you might be standing in the middle of the ring, judging a class, but have the same responsibility or that additional responsibility of watching the warm up ring. That's tough to do.
yeah.
Hmm.
So what we do have in BC is we do have an official designation, and they are called the provincial rules official. So basically, what those individuals are, they're basically a comparison to an EC steward, only they're a little more, they're there for more of an education because we are grassroots
Right.
systems. So they are an individual that is a carded official. And they're there to help management and to oversee warm up rings, equipment, make sure uh, things are the way that they should be, any welfare issues, anything like that. So if you're judging and you do have a pro attending the show, you can just, if they don't see it, you flag them down and then they go and deal with it along with show management. So that has been a really, it's proven to be really successful. We piloted it about 2 years ago, I think.
Hmm.
So more and more shows are requesting pros attend. So it just helps everybody out.
So again, then Sandy, if they don't have somebody, is it our responsibility to make sure somebody is there though?
It should
Protect.
be a management should have someone that they've kind of designated to just, keep an eye because
Mhm.
like you said, if you're in the ring judging, you can't see everything. So for management, it is recommended that there is somebody on the grounds that can kind of keep an eye on things too.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yep. Anybody else?
Wow. Okay. Hey, listen. That tells me two things. First of all, people know what the heck they're doing, and secondly, it's good. Good.
Yeah,
Listen, this is great, and if I want to thank everybody for participating. I know Sandy's going to do that in a sec, but I really want to thank you as well. These calls are effective. They're good for me as well. I will tell you, as an underwriter and somebody that's been doing this for a really long time, it's always good for me to verbalize some of the things that I've learned over the years. And I appreciate the audience, and I appreciate questions when they do arise. But I will say here, and Sandy, I hope you support is to say that this recording is posted somewhere, and that the PowerPoint is posted somewhere where folks can see it. But I also want to say that if anybody has a question tomorrow, next week, next month, call. This isn't about me trying to sell you something. I'm way past that in my career, frankly. This is about trying to educate and support the industry that's been so good to me. And so I'm here as a resource, and I'll look forward to speaking to anyone that has questions about any of this in the future.
awesome. Thanks, Mike. So I guess if there's no questions, we'll let everyone get on with their evening. And if you wake up at 4 in the morning with a question, feel you can also email me at Horse
Yeah.
Council, And I'll pass it along to Mike. So we will have this presentation up on the website. Bree, what do you think? Like a couple days?
Hopefully in a couple days, if not by the beginning of May, which I guess is technically this
A
Friday.
couple days. Yeah.
Yeah, who would have thought
So
it's May already?
I
Yeah.
know it's crazy. So yeah, so we'll have it up on the website and if you'd like a copy or something, we can also email it, right? Bree?
Yeah.
You betcha we can.
Yeah.
It'll be
So we'll
jumping
send it,
in.
we can send it out to you as well.
Yeah.
So with that, I will again thank Mike very much. I know it's way past your bedtime, so we appreciate you. Um, and as always, a great presentation and lots of information. So thank you very much. And thank you to
Welcome.
Bree and to all a good night.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.